At common law, animals are property. And since animals are property and cannot be persons, then animals cannot be beneficiaries of the trust. This changes, though, around the 90s.
Welcome to the Our Hen House interview. I'm Jasmin Singer.
I'm Mariann Sullivan.
And we're going to be joined in just a minute by some wonderful guests, Liv Baker and Kristin Stewart, who are going to be talking about PanWorks. And I'm going to let you talk to them directly about what it is and what they think about it and why they think this is a new way forward in terms of turning theory into action when it comes to animals, which is so cool, Mariann, because you and I have given talks at various universities, and I have from some of them come away thinking like, are we just sort of talking to the people at the table? Like what's going on? I love the idea of turning theory into action. Just a quick reminder that the Our Hen House podcasts are now multiple days a week. Rising Anxieties comes out on Tuesdays, the Hen Report on Thursdays, the long form interview, which is this, on Fridays, and Bonus for Flock members comes out on Mondays. We're a podcast and we're on YouTube. That's why you're looking at us right now, for some of you who are looking at us. So hit subscribe and like wherever you listen. All right, so now let's get to it. Mariann, do you want to introduce our guests?
Sure. Liv Baker is a conservation behaviorist and expert in wild animal well-being and the chair of the board of PanWorks. She also teaches at Sarah Lawrence. Kristin Stewart is an attorney, scholar, teacher, and founding board member of PanWorks, and her work bridges legal practice and ethical theory with a focus on how we care for and represent animals in law and policy. And I'm excited about this conversation because, as Jasmin just said, like we spend a lot of time talking about philosophy and theory and how it should be, and it doesn't seem to actually happen in the real world. There's such a real huge disconnect. So it's great that you're talking about that. Let me start with you. Since the intro that Jasmin just gave basically dodged the question of what PanWorks is, can you tell us what it is and what its mission is?
Sure. So PanWorks essentially is a think tank, a nonprofit think tank that is composed of an international group of people that is led, as it were, by a working board, which includes Chris and myself, along with William Lin, as well as Fran Santiago Avila. And it is focused on that theory into practice of promoting, privileging, and enabling the well-being of non-human animals across all spaces. That's what it is in short. But I would want Chris to weigh in on that if there's something to add in this introduction.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question?
Yeah.
Though? Did you say promoting, privileging? Did I hear that right?
Promoting and privileging.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, you know, I'm sure you come across this talk all the time about balancing, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we're in an anthropocentric world, and we'll get into this, right? We privilege humans. We privilege human needs, human interest, human conveniences. And if we don't always privilege it or prioritize it in this hierarchy, we'll talk about balancing the needs of humans alongside non-human animals. And we want to decenter humans, right? Really deconstruct the anthropocentrism that dominates our world. And in doing so, to privilege the needs, the interests, the lives, the wants, the desires, the motivations of non-human animals.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've just never heard it used like that as a verb, and I'm kind of my whole life is going through my head right now from a different perspective. But Kristin, yeah, why don't you weigh in as well? Because I know that you two work closely together, and you probably complement each other like a black and white cookie.
Oh, yum. Yeah, so I think PanWorks, PAN stands for people, animals, and nature. So our focus is quite broad in that respect. We're interested in privileging non-human animals, especially in the context of the natural world that we as humans share with other animals. And like Liv said, we think of, well, we are a think tank, a nonprofit organization, and we have, when she says we are worldwide, I want to share that we have amazing fellows that are part of the organization that contribute, and we have events where the fellows come together from all over the world to talk about various issues with non-human animals and how to promote the well-being of other animals. And this comes through academic work and also through these more practical programs. One of them is this animal trusteeship framework that we're really in the process of developing. So this conversation is this is not a, oh, here's the done deal, end of the conversation. We are stepping into the conversation with you now as this framework is developed and we go forward, and it's really exciting. So we're super happy to be here to talk about it.
Yeah, and I definitely want to focus on this whole idea of animal trusteeship. It's really interesting. I would say, I mean, from what I can tell, it's a work in progress, and there's still a lot to be worked out. But at least you're starting on this, like, on this idea that after all these years of talking about philosophy and should it be utilitarianism or deontology and on and on and on for years, and real world change just never gets. If we do have real world change, I shouldn't say we don't have any, but it's tiny. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual thoughts that people are having about the meaning of animals and their place in the world. So, all right, so let's get to this specific idea, though I know it's not the only thing that PanWorks will or is focusing on, but it's what I really want to focus on, this idea of animal trusteeship. Can you explain what it is, Kristin, and how it differs from current views of the approach? It's really a legal, I mean, we're really talking about a legal relationship, and you are a lawyer. So the current views of the appropriate legal relationship between humans and specifically wild animals. So I do want to mention for people listening, this is starting with wild animals, but from what I can tell, if we're thinking really big, it may not stay with wild animals, but that's where we're starting. So let's stick to that, because, got to change the world one step at a time.
I'll just say at the outset, you're absolutely right. Wild animals, and someone like myself who works largely with wild animals, largely with free living wild animals, but not exclusively. Our thinking really was generated around wild animals and free living wild animals. But it's very crucial to point out that our conception, our idea, the implementation of an animal trusteeship is very much for animals across all domains, across all spaces.
So can you, I guess I turn to Kristin because you are the lawyer, but either of you can answer that. Like just kind of explain what this idea is of animal trusteeship, like who's the trustee, who's just really specifics on how this works. And then we'll get into maybe some of the actual, we're not just talking theory, we're talking about specific situations in which this might actually move the ball forward.
Yes. And that's what makes it so cool, we think. So, I mean, starting at the beginning, for ages, animals have had no real voice in decisions that affect their lives, especially we're talking about wild animals. We make decisions, they affect real animal lives, they have no voice in it. This is just status quo, sure. So even the best advocates, they come with conflicts of interest to some degree. Our framework solves that with this, what we think of as a new role of these animal trustees. So we are, as we were thinking about really about animal representation, how do we get the animal's perspective into the room when decisions are being made about them? That's the question. We talked about, and I don't know if you've had any guests that have talked about the public trust doctrine.
No.
The public trust doctrine is kind of it's a court doctrine. It's a common law doctrine that has been applied to wildlife and nature in general, that says that the government holds nature in trust for the benefit of the public and future generations of the public. And this is sort of the governmental role. And this is something that many legal scholars point to say, well, look, this is, it started out with just sort of the natural landscape and has expanded to include wildlife really only pretty recently, actually. And isn't that wonderful? And they lean on the public trust doctrine to sort of enforce this idea that the government, who has control of wildlife and the natural world, that it manages it well for the benefit of the public. And by the public, we mean, of course, the human public. So the problem with a trustee in this kind of public trust doctrine framework, which I know I'm starting with what we're not doing, which is kind of strange, but
I really wanted to get into what the public trust doctrine is, because I do think, I mean, and I I assume the public trust doctrine is a big step forward from just out and out capitalism and free for all. So it, it might have been a really good way to think about holding land and as you point out later, animals for the public good, but not good enough.
Not good enough. And in fact, it's been around for quite a long time. And how it's applied and whether it's applied and all of those things are really important questions. If you're interested in managing the whole of the natural world and making those trade-offs in how it ought to be managed for the benefit of the public. And then you've got competing interests in the human public, like the hunters versus the conservationists versus often those are the same, versus the animal rights advocates, let's say, who would like to see individual animals on the landscape treated as individuals worthy of protection because they have inherent value in and of themselves, not just as parts of the larger environment. Okay, well, once we start talking about that, we kind of leave the realm of the public trust doctrine, because the public trust doctrine is based on trust principles. And so maybe we should go back to that as a starting point, right? So a trust is essentially an agreement. We have a trust holds property. The trust maker says, I'm going to make this trust, call it a bucket, and in that trust bucket, I'm going to put some property, some money, say, or other property for the benefit of, I'm going to name a beneficiary. And then the trustee is also named to take care of that bucket of money for the beneficiary. The problem has always been that with regard to trust thinking and wild animals, that the animals are in the bucket with the money. They're not over here as beneficiaries. And that's the case under the public trust doctrine, and that's the case under common law trust, generally speaking. And in fact, it makes sense if you understand animal law in most of the world and certainly in the US. And that is that our law separates, there is a dual kind of status available to all of us under the law. And as Steve Wise put it, there's this wall between those two statuses. One are persons and the other is property. At common law, animals are property. They cannot be persons. There is that wall that is between them. So a person must be, a beneficiary must be a person. And since animals are property and cannot be persons, then animals cannot be beneficiaries of the trust. All right. This changes, though, around the 90s, into the late 90s, we see actually for a long, long time, people have tried to use trusts and name mostly their companion animals as beneficiaries of the trust. Some of those cases would get to court and the court would say, well, that's not a trust because the beneficiary can't be an animal. However, sometimes the court would call it an honorary trust because they knew what was kind of going on, and they would sort of, it's not really enforceable in court, but we'll call it an honorary trust, and we're not going to kind of disturb the relationship in some times, in some cases. But now I'm really kind of creating kind of a quagmire here when I'm trying to simplify it. But by and large, if we were to go up to the 30,000-foot view, persons on the one side of the wall, animals on the other side of the wall, beneficiaries of a trust must be persons, therefore animals cannot be beneficiaries of a trust, a legally enforceable trust at common law. In the 90s, something changes, and that is what we've come to call pet trusts. Enough people, companion animals have the best legal coverage, legal, I can't really say rights, but their legal status is the highest of all of our relationships with other animals. Companion animals kind of win the prize in this respect. One of the ways we see that is through these pet trusts. Companion animals have been legislatively walked through a back door of that wall, if you will, and are allowed to be beneficiaries of a statutory trust. So now suddenly we have one state sees there's model legislation that comes out, and this pretty rapidly, I feel the same way, Mariann, when you started talking about how slow things are and how things just don't, it feels like it takes eons to get anything to happen. But these pet trust statutes really kind of came along and proliferated pretty darn quickly, because today we've got, I guess, depends on how you think of quickly, but over the past, since I was out of law school till now, all 50 states now have these pet trust statutes. And these statutes say you may name your companion animal, or in some cases, it doesn't even say companion animal. It just says animal. And it doesn't say your animal. It says an animal.
I was kind of involved in animal law and in the New York City Bar Association when this whole movement kind of started.
Yeah.
And one of the lawyers on the committee at the Bar Association, Frank Carlisle, was one of the leading trusted estates attorneys really interested in animals getting this going. And I think even at the time, there was some consciousness that this could have legs. This could be an idea that it will go beyond, because this was a huge breakthrough that people really didn't recognize as such. It kind of got in under the wire, under the consciousness of people, that they're making animals the beneficiaries of trusts. I mean, that has always been impossible. And if they can, that's a whole different legal status. And maybe we can do something with that. And I think in New York, and I know this is something you're looking into, so maybe you're aware of this particular case. There have been cases where I know chimpanzees have been made the beneficiary. Roger Fauci's chimpanzees were made the beneficiaries of the trust, with this idea that this is creating precedent to do something different. I'm not sure what that something is going to be, but do something a little different. And I love that you have taken it like that next step, or you're in the process of working to take it that next step as, all right, let's do something with this. This idea that the law has already recognized that animals, maybe not just pets, maybe not just privately held animals, have a new status under the law, and we can do something about it. And before we get further into that, you started off your discussion in this paper that you wrote with a little bit about the animals lawsuit against humanity. And I was totally unaware of that, but I know it was recently performed in New York City. And we were so sad that we couldn't make it. But I think it's so interesting that you've written about it and how it kind of is an introduction to your own work and this idea that animals can be the beneficiaries of trust, and that could lead us to all these new places. Can you just tell us a little bit about it's a theater piece, I guess. It's a very, very ancient theater piece, and how it relates to your work?
I didn't know about the theater piece, honestly. I knew about
Oh,
it.
that's too bad. Yeah,
Oh
it was
my,
just
yeah.
performed
Oh my
like
gosh.
2 weeks ago.
That would be amazing. I would love to say, no, I came across it. I use it in, gosh, I use that. It's a small book, beautifully illustrated little book. And it does go back. It goes way, way back. And there have been many translations of it. And I use it in all of my classes as a way to think about, I mean, in animal law, it just makes perfect sense, right? I start the semester with, let's read this book and let's think about, throughout the semester, we touch back on that book and say, okay, well, what would be the animal's perspectives on this? And in fact, sometimes I've built out kind of some narrative kind of exercises around it where they argue at the end of the semester based on what the law is and what it ought to be and those kinds of things based on that text, where the title says it all. If the listeners haven't had a chance to read this or see the show, oh my gosh, I can't wait to look more information about that up. It's about an island where, pristine island where all of the animals live in harmony, and these humans show up. They're blown off course, and all different types of humans, and they inhabit the island. And you know what happens next? Just look around, and then the animals decide this is not working for us, and so they get together and they go to the Spirit King and they air their grievances and they have a lawsuit about it. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for you to look up the show. We had a friend who went to see it and she said it was really cool. Can either of you share your thoughts on how animals as individuals have too often been left out of environmental scholarship and activism, and how this, I would say, new way of looking at it can change that?
Sure, maybe I'll take that. So as someone as an animal behaviorist, whose research is very much focused on the individual, it's very much sort of like grounded in who animals are and how the who of them entangles with their environments, their social environments, their ecological environments, and so forth. And what we see on balance is that individuals, the who of individuals, is largely dismissed, not understood. And when individuals are invoked, it's the essentialized, it's the wolf, the elephant, not the wolves, not the elephants, not their social groups, their families, the who and the what they are. And that's pervasive. We see that certainly in conservation. We've spoken about the public trust doctrine, which is anthropocentric, inherently so. And it informs the North American model of conservation, of wildlife management. And so in turn, those practices, those disciplines are anthropocentric. And so in conservation and certainly in wildlife management, individuals were dismissed, not considered, and certainly not understood. Not understood from an ethical perspective of beings on this planet that have intrinsic value, are not, and not just have value because of what they can provide humans. So the ethical who of animals has been historically dismissed, but also in that dismissal of understanding animals and who they are, there's been a dismissal of ecological understanding of just scientific knowledge. And so we've spent a lot of time spinning wheels in that dismissal. And we've had a lot of failed conservation interventions because of that. As someone who's done translocation work, reintroduction work, the utter failure historically of those interventions has largely come because conservation had a entrenched practice, implicit practice, sometimes explicit practice of ignoring individuals, their needs, and their contribution to their environments.
Yeah, I think we would be amiss at this moment if we didn't mention Jane Goodall and
That's right.
the enormous change. She not enough of a change because it still goes on, I'm sure, especially with animals who are not as sophisticated as chimpanzees. It's harder to see them as individuals, but she's my understanding she was one of the first to do that.
That's right.
All right, so I'd really like to get into the because I promised in the beginning that this wasn't just theory. This is a way of moving things forward. And so I want to talk a little bit about what the implications. I mean, people really don't know what a trust is, but you kind of explained that. And it's a very common thing to set up a trust for somebody. So if I understand correctly, you have ideas for how activists could actually work, or other, whatever, scientists, activists, that could do some work in this direction without even passing any new laws, that there could be at least beginning effort to set up a trust like this. So if somebody decided and you're talking about wild animals now, you're not talking about setting up a trust for your cat. And so if someone were to become an animal trustee and they said, all right, I'm going to be the person to move this forward, how would that work? What would be their responsibilities, and how would they set that up?
Well, okay, so we've proposed, and the framework we're working on is a sort of a dual path framework. So there's this legal enforceable animal trust, codified animal trust that we're calling a statutory trusteeship, that I happen to think that some state statutes would allow this with other than companion animals even today. But as a practical matter, we have named this the practical animal trust that is more of a normative trusteeship. And I mentioned this honorary trust before. It's not unlike this honorary trust. It may not be strictly legally enforceable, but we are coming off of those same principles from that statutory trust. So we've talked about kind of the principles there. We've got the trust itself is the property, or maybe some money, or whatever it is that is needed to advance whatever the advocacy is. And it's kind of hard to. Maybe we need an example.
Well, I actually made up a story.
Oh, good.
All right, there's a piece of, I don't know whether this would fit. There's a piece of land in your neighborhood. It's publicly owned, and either they're going to, build a skateboarding place there, or they're going to turn it into a sanctuary for animals or something like that. And you want to go in there and say, all right, I'm for the sanctuary for the animals, but I'm not here just representing myself. I'm here representing those animals. Is that how this works?
Yeah. Okay. So where I live, we've got these, I'm in Florida, and we have these Florida black bears, and they're in the neighborhood, they're roaming the neighborhood. We've got, let's say we're in my neighborhood, and the black bears particularly are going to be like really particularly affected by this skate park that's going in. And let's say the black bears are really, that's who you're particularly concerned about. And so, yes, you might, what we're envisioning here, and what we're envisioning with the normative trusteeship is you would identify your beneficiaries. Here, we'll call them the black bears in this neighborhood where this skate park is taking place. So we're getting a very clear context. It isn't like all animals in this area for all time, but this park situation, this decision, whether to make it a skateboard park or a natural space where the bears would thrive versus not. The bears are the beneficiaries. You, as the advocate, would make a document that would articulate these things that we've identified in the essay. Ideally, we'd like to see that document made public so that, you know, there's transparency there and what's going on. And then you could name yourself or somebody else as trustee. So the bears are the beneficiary. The trust document contains an explication, an explanation, and details about what this is about. It's about the skate park. It's about these decisions that are being made. We're going in to represent the interests of the black bears in this case. And if you can find an expert in black bears in this neighborhood, all the better. If you can't, you do the best you can. And you show up and you say, I'm there to speak and represent the interests of the bears and only the bears. And that's the real key. Other advocates may show up, but as a trustee, you have a singular duty, and that's to represent the interest of the bears.
The thing I love about this the best, all right, let me finish my thought so I don't forget it, that you would get to go in and just represent the bears. Because when we have to go in advocating for anything, we're expected to take this global view and take into account the needs of the children and the needs of the neighborhood. And that's what's expected of us. We're not expected to just go in and say, no, somebody else will make the decision, but this is what the bears need. And nobody's saying that because the bears aren't there. So that's something that's so appealing about this type of advocacy. Liv, did I interrupt?
Yeah, I wanted to, let me just say, add to what you pointed out, Mariann, is that even if, Chris mentioned other advocates. So say there are advocates from a well-known animal advocacy organization, and you would think that they are going there to advocate and represent the bears. Chris has mentioned that they're also tethered to their organizational interests and missions and campaigns and so forth. But even if, right, that you as an advocate, as someone representing a voice or bringing a perspective, is not expected to be global in whom or what you're advocating. Even if you go in thinking, I'm there for the bears, but it's not articulated in the way that Chris and I are talking about the practical animal trust, the explication of your responsibility, your roles, the beneficiary. What does it mean in an explicit, articulated way to represent the well-being of these, in this case, bears? If you don't go in with that articulation for yourself, for your community, what that community is, it could be a small, neighborhood group, it could be a town organization, a larger organization, what have you. If you don't have that articulated, then things can happen, such as peer pressure, right? Just the pressure from being in these settings, right? Even hearing other advocates people with certain personalities that might dominate more, louder voices, and you start to feel drowned out. You feel literally drowned out because people talk more, or you feel drowned out because maybe you start to second guess, or you start to feel the pressure of like, well, yeah, I'm here for the bears, but there are other animals. And then you start to, do I have to be the one to deal with these potential trade-offs, or think of, and you lose the task that you're on. And we're all susceptible to those types of pressures. The practical animal trust is bolstering, right? It should give a person who's taken on the role of trustee, it should give them the confidence, right? Because in some cases, you're literally handing out, this is the practical animal trust. These are my roles and responsibilities. These are the animals that I'm here to speak on behalf of. And that is there to bolster, to protect, to buffer. And it's a point that you can look to, right? To say, these are my tasks, these are my responsibilities. And everything you advocate for in those settings should be filtered through, how does this support, protect, defend the lives of these bears?
You mentioned other animals, and I just want to go back to that because I understand that there was one attempt to put this into practice already at something called the National Wolf Conservation. Can you tell us about that?
The National Wolf Conversation was
yeah.
Conservation
conversation.
Yes, yeah, that's all I was doing.
Or both. Actually, it was this context was much larger than the one that we've just imagined. This was a huge, it's unfortunate because it was kind of cut short because of political things and the new administration coming in and that sort of thing, as far as I understand it. But it was about like wolves in all the lower 48, and the Fish and Wildlife Service kind of commissioned this sort of stakeholder process, this nationwide stakeholder process, and the person or the organization that facilitated this, I think they're in the process of kind of cutting together video footage to make a documentary, if I understand that's still going forward. But it's all about, the wolf management and how we ought to be in relationship with the wolves on the landscape. So, I mean, we're talking a very, very broad context here. We at PanWorks thought, there's a lot of that. The organizer was going around to all of the stakeholders that you might imagine, the ranchers, and we have some indigenous folks, and we have advocacy groups, the big ones that you might imagine. And we thought a trustee should be there. Someone to speak just for the wolves should be there.
Yeah.
Because as we've seen with wolves, advocates who I think most people would be surprised, advocates who they might think would be a great trustee for the wolves. What? Oftentimes you can tell I'm trying to I want to say this carefully because advocates they do heroic work, and I'm not trying to put down advocates in any way, shape, or form. And I think Liv would agree with me. This isn't about saying advocates aren't adequate. This isn't about that at all. In fact, we think that this would be an amazing tool for advocates so that they can free themselves from what constrains them, which is this, that they have many masters. They have their other campaigns, their donors, their board, they go into these conversations with a lot of competing interests in every conversation. So what we thought would be a fabulous thing is to have an animal trustee, a wild animal trustee, a wolves trustee present and part of this national wolf conversation. And so we did. And
Wow.
Bill Lynn, who is, founding board member at PanWorks, served as the wolves trustee. And it was pretty extraordinary, pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I can see how it would be so much, just from my own point of view. You were saying that people have other, advocates are doing a great job, but they have so many different things pulling on them. Well, that's kind of the whole point, that when you go in there, you're expected to take into consideration all these other problems. Getting back to the skate park, which is tiny problem. Like, people will ask, well, what about the kids? Don't the kids really need? And I would be able to say, I can't speak to that. I can only speak to what this is going to do to those squirrels.
That's right.
And, then somebody else will make that decision. But I have to tell you because you always it always ends up being about the humans. It always ends up being about something else. And your duty in this situation, which would be go in and only talk about what's happening to the squirrels.
That's right.
Precisely. You so get it. Yeah. I mean, you so get it. That's the thing. And the thing is, you're
so much easier, really.
It's so much easier.
You don't have to admit that you don't care about kids.
It's focused. You don't have to dismiss other interests. You don't have to dismiss. It's
just
not
your
saying
business.
not. It's not like you're putting blinders on or you're removing knowledge that you have. You're still going in as part of a community, but the task is clear. Your role and responsibilities are clear. And like you're intuiting, Mariann, it's and as we talked about, it's freeing. It should be freeing.
Exactly.
It should bolster the confidence. It should relieve pressure. Because of that clarity, or what should be that clarity.
We're looking on the horizon. We're thinking about how to kind of put together some trainings for folks that want to kind of embrace this and move forward with this. Mm-hmm. And part of that, Liv and I, we've kind of joked about this, but I don't really think it's a joke. I really think it could be part of the swag package, but a hat that says trustee on it. Sometimes, you might want to take that hat off in a conversation, maybe not an official conversation, but say, okay, now as Mariann, yeah, of course I'm concerned about the kids. I'm concerned about this, that, and the other. But when I have this hat on, I'm the trustee and I'm here and I have to tell you, the Bears use this corridor all the time. And, the young and this is where the science comes in and the, awareness of this particular population that is or are the beneficiaries come in. But you're absolutely right. It is freeing, and the clarity and the singularity of purpose is everything. It takes the heat off of those folks that are in these conversations too, that feel so often what I didn't really know about until the last few years, frankly. I didn't understand the pressure that many advocates are under to compromise. And compromise in some major ways on policy things. This alleviates that.
Yeah, because it's not your job to compromise. You're not.
In fact, the opposite, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of practical questions here, which I don't. Like what if two people come in and say, I represent the deer, and how do you deal with that? And can you take this to a less informal place to a formal place? I assume some of this is waiting to be worked out, but is there anything you want to add to the structure more than what we've said today?
Can I just speak to some things, Chris, if you don't mind first?
Sure. Yeah.
So training, I'll just say, if there's the problem of multiple trustees for animals in a room, absolutely, that is the problem to have, as Chris and I have talked about, right? You think about in the National Wolf conversation, there was more than one rancher there. There wasn't the singular rancher there, right? And so think where the balance should be in a space that is there to make decisions on behalf of, that will affect the lives, will decide death of other animals. The balance should be in their favor. The goal should be multiple trustees. So I would say that is a good problem to have.
But is there any concern that not everybody will be entirely honest about whether they're representing the interests of the wolves? Like people going in and saying, well, I know wolves. I've known wolves all my life and they don't care.
Right. And Mariann, but that is what we think is the importance and the beauty, if I can say, of the practical animal trust. That one is held to account. And the transparency that a practical animal trust confers to the process. Because otherwise, that's exactly what you get. You'll get people who internalize their role and say, yeah, I care about wolves or bears or spider or whomever it happens to be, and say, of course. And that happened. We saw that occurring, or we anticipated that during the National Wolf conversation, because they were in an advocacy role, or they knew wolves or the wolf, that therefore they're the trustee. Well, that's the whole point of what we've developed, is to say that is not enough. That is not sufficient. And here is an approach, a model to get to what is more than sufficient, what provides these animals. So if in a preferred scenario, if we had multiple bear trustees in the hypothetical that we've talked about, the goal would be that they would be there genuinely, they will have developed the practical animal trust. And what's wonderful about having more than one trustee is that you get that breadth and depth. Because, and this is what I wanted to get back to, we've talked about experts, right? You know, if there's a bear expert, or what does it mean to be an expert, or to be even sort of have the characteristics, right, for the role of a trustee, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't want an ecologist steeped in that world of ecology to be the bear trustee necessarily, if what they're going to do is just bring purely ecological principles, think about bears in an ecosystem, and we're at that level. That is not the role and responsibility of the bear trustee. So that, and part of the practical animal trust should be, what does it mean to represent animal well-being, the well-being of these animals in this context? That should be the fundamental question. What does it mean to do that? And how do we do that? And who should do it? And so in some cases, you know, so we can have more informal trustee spaces, someone going to maybe a public hearing in their township, in their municipality, they're looking for public perspectives, to something that's facilitated or led by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, right? And so there's going to be a lot of wiggle room as to who the expert is, right? Who is sort of eligible, as it were, to be a trustee. So it needs will must, you know, depending upon the situation. But if someone is entering into a trusteeship role with authenticity, with a genuine heart, with a genuine want to represent the well-being, even if it's flawed, the practical animal trust that they develop, it will be leagues above what would otherwise occur. And that flawed process is still good, right? So if and the goal for PanWorks is to develop and provide training for people at all of these different levels, from the individual
and
in the
hats.
neighborhood. What's that?
And hats.
Yes.
That's right. From an individual in a neighborhood that says, I care about the squirrels, right? And, you know, to, I am part of this organization, but I want to decouple myself from the constraints of my organization to represent the wolves, for example, at this national level, right? To get that training, to talk about what do you need to develop? What knowledges do you sort of need to draw from, right? And it's all going to be context specific, and that's going to be crucial. And what we want to be able to do in this training is to provide a very flexible, practical animal trust template that people, organizations, groups can take back and to use, because our goal is not to micromanage this process, right? You have to go through us, you know, but training is no doubt absolutely crucial, if only to learn about what does it mean to develop a trust, to understand who the beneficiaries are, to bound your role and your responsibility, and to articulate that to yourself, to your group, and yes, to the animals you're acting on behalf of.
Well, I'm sure many people listening will be extremely intrigued by this idea. And can you just tell us where they can find out more?
Panworks.io. PAN, like PAN works, WORKS.io. And also the Medium, we've got the essay there on the Medium, and can read a little bit there about things.
We can link to that in the show notes.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have materials up on the training. As we've said, this is a work in progress, and we're working as fast as we can to get there because we think it's time.
Well, it's very exciting work, and I wish you all the best for it. And I
Thank
know there is
you.
more to be developed, but you've already thought through a lot of issues that I think people have been struggling with. So thank you so much. I hope you'll stay on for a little bit to join us for our bonus segment with the flock. And
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's it from us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to our Henhouse on your favorite podcatcher and on YouTube. Hit like wherever you can. We really appreciate it. It helps us get the word out there. And we will talk to you next time.